folks. Welcome to ERTT Radio. I'm Mike, your host. Thanks for joining us. One of the things I haven't gone over on my broadcast is the Constitution of the United States and its various amendments. So I wanted to go over that and explain some things so that way you are better informed. And in the upcoming elections, you can see where people stand based on the Constitution. Now, the First Amendment is something that's guaranteed the right that we have now of free speech that I am exercising. It says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So, whatever religious beliefs I have, I can practice and go to church without any interference from the government. The amendment goes on to say, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. So, the news media can pretty much say what they want, whether it's for the government or against the government, without reprisals, as in some countries. Amendment goes on to say, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble. So, people can assemble peacefully, such as when they had the Million Biker drive-through at Washington, D.C. It was a peaceful assembly. You may say Occupy Wall Street, although there were some violent acts that occurred during that assembly, but with no violence, you have the right to peaceably assemble. And the last part of the amendment reserves the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So you can petition the government for grievances you have against them. Now, move on to the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment says a well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, out of all the amendments, this is something that is very controversial, and it has been interpreted millions of different ways. But you need to read it for what it says. A well-regulated militia is necessary for the security of a free state. In order to be free, you need to have a well-regulated militia. And it doesn't stop there. The right of the people to keep and bear arms. So that's also part of keeping a free state. And it has been proven time and time again throughout history what happens when you take the right of the people to keep and bear arms. Germany, Russia, all those turned into totalitarian regimes that ended up exterminating millions of people because they could not defend themselves. The last part of this amendment is very important. It says that those rights shall not be infringed upon, meaning all the laws that the government has come up with to regulate. The Constitution is very clear. They shall not be infringed. So you legally, according to the Constitution, cannot touch the right of the people to keep and bear arms. Period. It shall not be infringed upon. That is what the Constitution says. I'll go on to the Third Amendment. I won't continue to read these verbatim, only some of the ones that I deem are very important. The Third Amendment goes on to say that no soldier shall be quartered in any house. Now, one of the things that happened in the early days is that the British government decided that the newly formed American colonies should be required to house British soldiers without consent of the owner. Whether you like it or not, you're going to house these British soldiers. Well, this amendment prevents that. Not even in time of war is that allowed, except in a manner prescribed by law. Now, we'll go on to the Fourth Amendment. Now, this is very important. It says the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue, but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched, and the persons or things to be seized. So, that protects us from police coming into your house late at night and seizing whatever things that they think are illegal. They can't go into your house without a warrant, because that is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. You have that right to prevent a police state from occurring. And something that happens that is usually brought up is when this right is violated. And the news media, for all its faults, does usually bring up when something like this happens. When police go into a house and search or seize something that they're not authorized to do. And the warrant, in order to get one, pretty much a judge is saying, yes, you are authorized to search X person and you can seize X items for whatever crime that that person is suspected of. So this amendment is very important to our freedoms. Now, go on to the Fifth Amendment. You hear a lot of times people saying, I plead the Fifth. Well, what is the Fifth? The Fifth says, no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising pretty much in the military during time of war. And it also goes on to say no person shall be subject for the same crime twice. So if you're tried and you're found innocent, they can't touch you again because of the Fifth Amendment. And it also goes on to say you shall not be a witness against yourself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. So, if you are accused of a crime and you go to trial for it and they find you innocent of the charges, they cannot try you again. You have been found innocent of that crime. Now, let's say you're going through the trial itself and you don't have to be a witness against yourself. A lot of times people use the Fifth Amendment kind of liberally, but if people are asking you questions, you don't have to technically answer, because if it incriminates you, you can refuse to answer. You have that right as an American citizen. Now let's move on to the Sixth Amendment. This also has to do with law. In all criminal prosecutions, you have the right to a speedy and public trial, meaning they're not going to do some trial of Jesus late at night and sentence you to death with no one knowing anything about it. According to the Sixth Amendment, you have the right to something that's speedy and public, meaning it shouldn't take 50 years for you to go to trial. And it is also by an impartial jury of the state and district where the crime was committed. So you don't have people of the family whom claimed you wronged them sitting on the jury, which is one of the things with the Trayvon Martin case. They had to search really hard to find somebody who didn't already know about what had happened and already had an opinion on it, because they wanted an impartial jury, so there was no excuse of a mistrial. And it took a lot of work to do that, because the news media blew it way out of proportion. This amendment also requires the accused to be able to have the assistance of counsel for his defense when they read you your rights. Before any questioning happens, you have the right to an attorney to defend you. I have not personally had to inquire for an attorney for anything, but I do know people who have. And most of the time they tell you not to say anything until they go over everything. And that is to protect your rights, so you don't end up inadvertently giving up your rights that were guaranteed in the Fifth Amendment, that you don't have to be a witness against yourself. Now, let's go to the Seventh Amendment. Seventh Amendment goes on, and it says, in suits at common law where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, the right of trial by jury shall be preserved. Now, this $20 was a lot of money back in the day, but it still says $20 now. So if you are going up in a lawsuit and there's more than $20 at stake, there will be a trial by jury, period. Which is why a lot of big corporations want to settle out of court. The reason for that is because it'll go to a trial by jury, and most of the jury members don't side with the big corporation. So that is what that amendment protects. Now let's go on to the Eighth Amendment. Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. Now, this has been twisted all kinds of out of whack. What is considered cruel and unusual? Now, you can have your own opinions on that. The article, that is the entire amendment. So it does not go into detail of what is considered cruel or unusual, or what an excessive fine would be. I don't think you should be labeled with $1 million fine for a traffic citation. That would be an excessive fine imposed. A cruel and unusual punishment. A lot of people throw the death penalty as cruel and unusual. I don't believe it is, depending on the offense. Now, if you're jaywalking, I don't believe you deserve the death penalty. I honestly don't believe that. That would be cruel and unusual punishment. I just jaywalked. That was it. But if you are a mass murderer, you've taken people's lives, and they're not coming back, and I don't think it's cruel or unusual punishment for you to suffer the same fate as all your victims. So that is how I stand on that. But the article, the amendment, does not go any farther into detail. Let's go to the Ninth Amendment. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. Now, pretty much what this is, I'll explain this amendment more with the 10th Amendment. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it, the Constitution, to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. So the Constitution in Amendment 9 is not meant to deny or disparage certain rights. And the 10th says anything that's not specifically given to the United States in the Constitution and is not prohibited to the states are reserved. So that is how the Constitution set up the power in government. The government was meant to be, the federal government was meant to be small and pretty much an organization of the states. Now, unfortunately, later on in history, the power shifted. But the amendment still says the same thing. Anything that's not specifically given to the federal government is reserved to the states and the people, period. Now let's go on to the 11th Amendment. The 11th Amendment pretty much explains that the judicial power of the United States isn't meant to go beyond the United States. So we can't make judicial decisions for France, for example. It's meant to just be for the federal government. And it's not to take the power away from the states, which was back in Amendment 10, which was reserved to the states. The 12th Amendment goes on to explain how the voting process was designed. Electors meet from the different states and vote for president and vice president. Now we'll go on to the 13th Amendment. and it pretty much bans slavery in the United States, or involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime whereof you are duly convicted. So the 13th Amendment is very important to the United States. And this was pretty much what abolished slavery. The 14th Amendment pretty much goes into somewhat detail about citizenship, naturalized citizens of the United States, some of their rights, and it talks about some of the different requirements for being elected into office. And it also says Congress, the fifth section of this amendment, says Congress shall have power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of the article. So it can pretty much enforce by legislation everything that goes with that amendment. Now let's move on to the 15th Amendment. And this allows pretty much anyone to vote. This amendment states the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So whether you were a slave, no matter what your race was or color, you could vote. Now, this didn't give women the right to vote. It just based it on race, color, or servitude. Now, the 16th Amendment. Up until this point in time period, before 1913, there was no income tax. None. Now, every year, we have to pay income tax. And you can thank Congress for ratifying this in 1913, because it allows them to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived, without apportionment among the states, and without regard to any census or enumeration. Now we'll look at the 17th Amendment. This amendment, I believe, did the most damage to the United States. This amendment talks about the Senate. And up until this time, back in the first article of the Constitution, and I'll state it specifically for you. The Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state, chosen by the legislature thereof, for 6 years, and each senator shall have 1 vote. So up until this time period, every senator was chosen by the state legislature. So that kept the power with the state. I mean, each person every 2 years elected a representative for their district. Now, the Senate was not chosen by the people. This was chosen by the legislature. So they kind of hand-picked who they wanted. And they picked 2. Every state picked 2. The 17th Amendment changed that. The 17th Amendment states, the Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state, elected by the people thereof, for 6 years. That changed the legislative branch significantly, and definitely not for the better. Now, why do I say that? Well, the people, not being normally very fluent with government proceedings, picking somebody for 2 years isn't as devastating. If the guy's a dimwit, they can remove him 2 years later. And with 460 some odd representatives, he doesn't do as much damage regarding laws in the United States. However, a senator is selected for 6 years. So that 6 years, the guy can pretty much do what he wants. And most of the time, you forget why you elected the guy and don't pay much attention. He doesn't have to worry about staying in office for 6 years. That's longer than the president. So why does most of the time the Senate end up staying the same? Because they are elected for so long, not much ends up changing in the Senate. And this changed our government forever. Now, the legislative branch, each person elected their representative to go to the state house. Now, all these people familiar with the state government would pick who they wanted to represent their state for 6 years. which is a long time. Now, you may think that electing somebody every 6 years is a good idea. I have more power in the government. But it takes that senator 6 years, and he doesn't have to worry about re-election versus your representative. And the senator pretty much becomes a long-term representative because you're electing them, not your governmental body for the state electing them. Now let's go on to the 18th Amendment. The 18th Amendment banned alcohol. They called it intoxicating liquors back then, but it banned it. And a lot of the stuff that happened in the 20s with violent gangsters was part of the illegal sale, manufacture of alcohol. This amendment was later repealed. Now, ladies, your favorite amendment is the 19th. This guaranteed your right to vote. Now let's go on to the 20th Amendment. 20th Amendment basically spells out when the president takes office, if, per se, the president were to die before taking office, who takes over. It goes into some detail about that and how the government will operate with the death of the duly elected leader. Now, we'll go on to the 21st Amendment, which repealed the 18th Amendment. So you could drink again, which, in my opinion, it was extreme government overreach to ban a substance that had been used throughout history, maybe not necessarily for the good, but it was not the government's job to go in there and ban a substance. If a state wanted to make it illegal, they could have made it illegal, but it was more power away from the states that the federal government just decided to take. So the 21st Amendment repealing that was a good thing. Now, after FDR, Congress changed the Constitution, and I think this was very appropriate. FDR served pretty much 4 terms in office. Okay, each presidential term being 4 years, that would have been the equivalent of 16 years. Now, up until this time, in 1951, it wasn't illegal to serve more than 10 years or 2 terms. It was more of a tradition that presidents served their 2 terms and got out. And most of the time, people didn't want the person after more than 2 years. So, when FDR ran again and again and was in office during the Great Depression, it's changed a lot of things, a lot of people's mindset about the president. So, 22nd Amendment limited him to 2 terms. Now, the 23rd Amendment, which was ratified in 1961, pretty much gave those in Washington, D.C. a voice, because that's where the seat of the government was, but there was no one representing Washington, D.C. It wasn't technically attached to Maryland or Delaware, which were kind of right next door to each other. So this provided them that voice. Now, the 24th Amendment pretty much gave the citizens the right to vote, and it shall not be abridged by the United States or any state by reason of failure to pay a tax, a poll tax, meaning you go to the polls to vote, they would tax you. That is not legal, because if the person who has no money, he can't vote when you do that. So the 24th Amendment made any of that illegal, which I think the Founding Fathers would have supported that, being the way they picked people to vote. Everyone should have a say in the government. And removing any kind of tax associated with it keeps rich, power-hungry people from keeping the poor voters out of the polls. It prevents that scenario. Now, the 25th Amendment goes into detail about what happens with the president dying, how the vice president will take over, if something happens to the vice president, who goes on down the line if our leader were to die in office. Now, the 26th Amendment, which some people like, some people don't like, is that it gave people 18 years and older the right to vote. Before, it used to be 21. But now, since the 26th Amendment, it allows people of the age of 18 to vote. Now, this is kind of important because when I was 18, I ended up voting. I didn't have to wait till I was 21. And you can agree with this or not agree with this, but I think if you're able to move out and live on your own and you're considered an adult at 18, you should be able to vote. Now, you need to be able to make an informed decision just like everyone else. I know some people who don't think people of 18 years of age should be allowed to vote. I don't agree with them, and this is why. I don't think some people who are the age of 40, 50, 60 should vote. Now, before you get all up in arms about that, let me explain. Not everyone is responsible with their vote. And I've gone into detail on this program about that. If you look at the candidates, base your decision on what you believe in and how that candidate lines up with how you believe, and you know what you're doing, you're not just casting a vote for Jim Bob because he's got a cool sounding name, then you should be responsible to vote at age 18. You're considered an adult. At 16, you can drive a car. There's no limit to how long you can work. You're at working age, so you should be able to vote. Just vote responsibly. Now, here's an amendment, the 27th Amendment, which I think is a really interesting time period when they put it through. It was 1992. It says, no law varying the compensation for services of senators or representatives shall take effect until after an election of representatives shall have intervened. So, Hojo Blow, sitting up in the representatives, says, hey, I think I deserve more money, so let's all vote ourselves a raise. Good idea? Yeah, let's all vote ourselves a raise. Well, you vote yourself a raise, and then your constituency says, no, I don't want you to have that money. You didn't earn it. You didn't do what we wanted you to do. Next election, goodbye. So guess who gets that money? The new guy who took your spot. So this is a very interesting amendment. Being that it came so late, I would have guessed it would have been something the Founding Fathers would have put in because they could pick raises. Let's add a raise. But back then, you weren't paid much to be a representative or senator. There's not millionaires in the Congress. It was just farmers who took a sacrifice away from their work at the farm, their plantation, to go sit in the Congress for a couple years. And that really took away from their lives. They came back and it was, they had to fix everything that was left for 2 years. Or for the time that they were gone. So they didn't get paid much. It was more of a civil service type duty. You weren't overly compensated. So I definitely agree with the 27th Amendment. And it allows us voters to remove the bimbo who puts in for raises that they don't deserve to have. When a congressman is sitting in office, not taking any physical risk for the job he's doing, the worst thing he has to do is go to meetings and hear somebody prattle on about something that's overly boring. What kind of pay should you get? I'm sorry, I think it should be more of the minimum wage. With the amount of power that you're vested in running the government, if we give you a lot of money too, that's not a good combination. And we can see Congress has no responsibility when it comes to spending money. the $1 trillion in debt, does that not give you an indication? I would hope it would. So, hopefully, you guys enjoyed this broadcast about the different amendments of the Constitution, and I would definitely recommend each of you to get a copy of this, of the Constitution. The Heritage Foundation, I know, has given them out for free before. That's how I got my copy of the Constitution. And that way you can look, and when people say you don't have the right to keep and bear arms, you can prove them wrong. When somebody tries to search and seize something that they're not allowed to, you've got the Fourth Amendment and the Constitution to back you up. When someone tries to take your free speech away, or say you can't peaceably assemble, you have the First Amendment that says you can. And these rights are guaranteed to the American people. And if you don't know the freedoms and the rights you have, then you will never know when somebody takes them away. And I want to thank you folks for listening to the program here today. That's all we have time for. And I hope you are looking forward to our next broadcast, as we are going to have a guest here on the program, first guest for ERTT Radio. And I'm really excited about it, and I hope you are. Definitely look forward for that broadcast here on the website. And if you have any questions for my special guest, he is going to be in law enforcement. So if you have any questions that you would like me to ask on the program to him, you can send your requests to my email at miked@erttradio.com. And remember to get a copy of the Constitution. Knowing your freedoms and your rights will help you keep them and help you stay free. And as always, live free and die free.